The slap echoed through the cabin like a gunshot. 10-year-old Jacob Washington froze, his hand pressed to his burning cheek. "How dare you touch me?" Eleanor Bennett hissed, her diamond rings flashing beneath the cabin lights. Around them, passengers gasped. Some filmed, others looked away. "Ma'am, please stop," said flight attendant Darren Miller, stepping forward too late. At the jet bridge entrance, a tall woman in a navy suit appeared. Her eyes locked on the scene. "Jacob." Her voice carried calm authority that silenced the cabin. What no one realized was that the boy she'd just struck wasn't just another child, he was the son of the airline's CEO. "These children don't belong in first class." Eleanor Bennett's shrill voice cut through the ambient noise of passengers boarding flight AA 782 from Atlanta to Chicago. Her diamond rings flashed under the cabin lights as she pointed accusingly at the 3 black children seated across the aisle. 10-year-old triplets, James, Jasmine, and Jacob Washington, exchanged confused glances. They had been quietly reading their books and playing their handheld games with headphones barely making a sound since settling into their spacious first-class seats. "Ma'am, please lower your voice." Darren Miller, a flight attendant with 15 years of experience, approached with a practiced calm. "The children aren't causing any disturbance." "That boy touched my seat," Eleanor hissed. Her French manicured finger aimed directly at Jacob. "And they're being disruptive. They need to be moved to economy where they belong." Jacob's eyes widened in hurt confusion. He had only briefly touched the back of her seat when he lost his balance while returning from the bathroom. "I'm sorry, ma'am," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I just tripped." Earlier that morning, the Washington triplets had been buzzing with excitement in their Atlanta home. This would be their first time flying first class, and they had been meticulously coached by their mother on proper airplane etiquette. "Remember to use your indoor voices," their mother had reminded them while adjusting Jacob's bow tie. "Keep your devices on silent and always say please, and thank you to the flight attendants." James, the analytical one, had packed his favorite space books. Jasmine, confident and protective, had her debate team notes to review. Jacob, the sensitive artist of the trio, brought his sketchpad and colored pencils. All 3 had promised to be on their absolute best behavior. Eleanor Bennett, meanwhile, was having a typically entitled day. At Riverview Country Club that morning, she had sent back her mimosa twice, complained about the temperature of the pool, and made a young server nearly cry when she demanded to speak to a manager about the subpar Eggs Benedict. Fellow country club members were accustomed to her behavior, part of the price of admission to Atlanta's old money social circle. Now on the plane, Eleanor's voice grew louder. "I paid good money for this seat, and I refuse to spend this flight with unsupervised children ruining my experience." "Ma'am, these children have proper tickets for these seats," Darren explained patiently, though his jaw tightened. "And they've been perfectly well behaved." Several passengers had begun to notice the commotion. A middle-aged man across the aisle discreetly took out his phone and started recording. A woman 2 rows back frowned disapprovingly at Eleanor. "Well, I don't care what tickets they have." Eleanor sniffed, her voice dripping with disdain. "They clearly don't belong here." The racist undertone wasn't lost on anyone within earshot. Jasmine instinctively reached for her brother's hands, forming a protective chain, as they'd been taught to do in uncomfortable situations. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to stop. Your comments are inappropriate," Darren said more firmly, positioning himself slightly between Eleanor and the children. "Inappropriate. What's inappropriate is having these kinds of people taking up space in first class." Eleanor's voice rose again. "In my day, there were standards for premium cabins." Jacob flinched at her words, a single tear sliding down his cheek. James stared straight ahead, his body rigid with tension. Jasmine's eyes flashed with anger beyond her years. That's when it happened. Jacob, trying to retrieve the colored pencil he dropped, leaned slightly into the aisle. His shoulder barely brushed against Eleanor's arm as she was gesticulating wildly. The crack of a palm against his cheek echoed through the cabin. Gasps rippled through first class. Jacob recoiled, his hand flying to his face in shock. "How dare you touch me?" Eleanor screeched, as if she were the victim. Darren immediately reached for his phone to call security. His face a mask of professional outrage. "Ma'am, you've just assaulted a minor. I'm going to have to ask you to gather your belongings immediately." Eleanor was too caught up in her self-righteousness to notice the elegant black woman who had been watching the scene unfold from the entrance of the jet bridge. Her expression shifting from disbelief to controlled fury as she witnessed the slap. What nobody on that plane yet realized was that this confrontation was about to take a dramatic turn that would change lives forever. Jacob James Jasmine. The woman's authoritative voice commanded attention as she strode purposefully down the aisle. The triplets looked up, relief flooding their faces. "Mom," they cried in unison. Eleanor Bennett turned, annoyance still etched across her features until she registered the woman approaching. Tall, impeccably dressed in a tailored navy suit with natural hair styled in a sophisticated updo, the woman exuded confidence and authority. The Atlantic Airways executive pin glinted on her lapel. "I'm Dr. Amara Washington, CEO of Atlantic Airways." She stated, her voice calm but edged with steel. "And these are my children." Eleanor's face drained of color so rapidly. It was as if someone had pulled a plug. Her mouth opened and closed wordlessly. Dr. Washington Darren addressed her respectfully, clearly recognizing her. "I was just about to call security regarding this incident." "Thank you," Darren, Amara replied, glancing at his name tag. "I saw what happened. Please do make that call." Murmurs rippled through the cabin as passengers connected the dots. Just yesterday, business news outlets had announced the historic appointment of Dr. Amara Washington as the first black female CEO of any major American airline. Atlantic Airways' parent company had acquired this smaller carrier just months ago, making it part of their growing transportation empire. Eleanor began a clumsy retreat. "I had no idea." "There must be some misunderstanding." The boy, Jacob Amara, corrected sharply. "My son's name is Jacob." "Yes, Jacob." "He startled me and I reacted." "I certainly didn't mean to." Amara wasn't listening. She knelt beside Jacob gently, turning his face to examine his reamed cheek. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" Jacob nodded bravely, though his eyes were still wet. "I'm okay, Mum." 15 years ago, Amara Washington had been one of the youngest pilots in Atlantic Airways' fleet, with a master's degree in aeronautical engineering and a passion for aviation that began when she was just a child. Despite graduating at the top of her class, she faced constant questioning of her abilities and belonged to a small minority of black female commercial pilots. While flying, she completed her MBA and doctorate in business administration through night classes and online courses. Her analytical mind and innovative approach to airline efficiency caught the attention of executives. She moved into operations management then to the Seawhite as COO 3 years ago. Yesterday's announcement of her promotion to CEO had been a groundbreaking moment in aviation history. The triplets had been scheduled to fly with their aunt today, but she had fallen ill at the last minute. With Amara already headed to Chicago for her first major board meeting as CEO, the plans had changed to include the children. That woman hit Jacob. Mom Jasmine reported, her young voice indignant but controlled. "I saw it, honey." Amara assured her daughter, then stood to her full height, turning to face Eleanor. By now, other passengers were openly recording the encounter. A woman in business attire approached tentatively. "Dr. Washington, I'm Janet Choi with Bloomberg. We just ran your profile yesterday. I'm so sorry this happened to your family." Amara nodded acknowledgement, but kept her focus on Eleanor, who was now fumbling with her designer handbag, clearly looking for an escape. "Miss..." Amara raised an eyebrow. "Bennett." "Eleanor?" "Bennett." The woman mumbled her earlier. Confidence evaporated. "Miss Bennett, you struck my child," Amara stated. "That is battery. It's both a crime and a clear violation of our airline policies regarding passenger conduct." Eleanor's face flushed. "Now wait just a minute. I'm a platinum member with over 1 million miles." "You can't possibly." 2 Atlantic Airways security officers appeared at the jet bridge entrance, responding to Darren's call. "Mom, my face still stings," Jacob said quietly. A flash of maternal pain crossed Amara's professional facade. Those who knew her well understood the delicate balance she'd maintained throughout her career, being seen as both competent enough to lead and compassionate enough to be likable. A tightrope walk familiar to many black women in corporate America. She had prepared her children for moments like this, though she had hoped they wouldn't face such blatant discrimination so young. The conversations had started early in their home. The careful explanations about history, the role-playing of scenarios, the emphasis on maintaining dignity in the face of ignorance. But preparation was different from experience, and seeing her son's wounded expression broke something inside her. "Security will escort you from this aircraft," Miss Benara said firmly. "Whether charges are filed will be decided shortly." Eleanor's entitlement suddenly reasserted itself. "Do you know who my husband is? Thomas Bennett is on the board of First National Bank. We donate millions to charity. You'll be hearing from our attorneys. And you'll be hearing from ours." Amara responded coolly. "Darren, please ensure my children are comfortable. I'll be overseeing Miss Bennett's departure personally." As security approached, the full reality of her situation finally seemed to dawn on Eleanor Bennett. In a matter of minutes, she had assaulted the child of one of the most powerful women in the transportation industry and done so in front of dozens of witnesses with recording devices. The social media storm was already brewing, though none of them knew yet just how massive it would become. "I'm leaving. I'm leaving." Eleanor Bennett sputtered, hastily gathering her Hermes bag and cashmere wrap. She attempted to push past Amara toward the exit, desperate to escape the humiliation that was closing in on her like a vice. "Ma'am, you'll need to come with us," said the taller of the two air marshals who had arrived on scene. His tone was professionally neutral, but his positioning made it clear. Eleanor had no choice in the matter. "This is ridiculous. I barely touched the boy," Eleanor protested. But the phones recording her from multiple angles told a different story. The video capturing her palm connecting with Jacob's cheek was already being uploaded to Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok, with hashtags like #first-class-assault and #flying-while-black. Mom James tugged at Amara's sleeve, his analytical mind already processing the implications. "Everyone's recording this. Is that going to make things worse?" Amara knelt to her son's level, aware that all three children were processing this trauma in their own ways. Jacob sat silently, his hands still occasionally touching his cheek in disbelief. Jasmine's eyes darted between her hurt brother and the woman who had struck him, righteous anger simmering just beneath her composed exterior. "Sometimes documentation protects us," Amara explained quietly. "But you three don't need to worry about that right now." As Eleanor was escorted toward the jet bridge, her protests grew louder. "This is discrimination against me. I'll have your jobs. All of your jobs." The second air marshal gently but firmly guided her elbow. "Miss Bennett, please lower your voice and come with us without further incident." Amara turned to Darren. "I need to follow this through for security protocols, but I don't want to leave my children. Dr. Washington." "I'll stay right here with them," Darren assured her, "and Sarah will bring them some hot chocolate." He nodded toward another flight attendant who was already moving toward the galley. Amara squeezed each child's hand. "I'll be right back. You're safe now." As she followed the air marshals and a still protesting Eleanor off the plane, Amara's mind raced through protocols and procedures. As CEO, she needed to ensure this situation was handled by the book without any appearance of using her position for personal vengeance. As a mother, she wanted to comfort her children and shield them from further harm. In the jet bridge, Eleanor's demeanor shifted from outrage to panic as the reality of her situation sank in. "Dr. Washington, surely we can resolve this without involving authorities?" she pleaded, her voice honeyed. "Now, it was a misunderstanding. I reacted poorly. I admit it." "Miss Bennett, you struck a child," Amara replied evenly. "My child. That's not something I take lightly, nor does Atlantic Airways." "I've had a stressful day," Eleanor attempted. "My investment portfolio took a hit, and my housekeeper quit without notice. I'm not normally like this." The transparent lie hung in the air. People who weren't normally like this didn't so easily resort to racist comments and physical violence. While airport police took statements in a private room off the concourse, Amara called her executive assistant. "Kesha, I need you to contact legal immediately. There's been an incident involving my children on Flight 782. Yes, they're physically okay, but Jacob was assaulted by another passenger. I need to know our options, both as a family and as a company. Inside the cabin, Sarah delivered hot chocolate to the triplets while Darren ensured the other first-class passengers were settled. The flight was now running 20 minutes behind schedule. Is everyone okay with a slight delay while we handle this situation? Darren asked the cabin. The unanimous murmurs of assent reflected the passengers' collective disgust at what they had witnessed. That poor boy, whispered an elderly white woman across the aisle. In all my years, I never thought I'd see such behavior. 2 years ago, Amara had sat the triplets down for what many black parents call the talk. Not about birds and bees, but about existing in a world that might sometimes view their skin color before seeing their humanity. There might be times, she had explained gently, when people treat you differently or unfairly because of how you look. Like when Mrs. Peterson always calls on the white kids first in math. Jasmine had asked startlingly perceptive at 8 years old. Something like that Amara had confirmed. When those things happen, remember 3 things. Your worth isn't determined by how others treat you. Always keep your dignity, and I will always be there to protect you. Now, as Jacob sipped his hot chocolate with a still stunned expression, those words echoed in Amara's mind as she rejoined her children. The plane will take off soon, she assured them, sliding into the seat beside Jacob. Miss Bennett won't be joining us for the flight. Is she in trouble? James asked. Yes, Amara answered honestly. When adults make bad choices, there are consequences. She called us these kinds of people, Jasmine said quietly. She meant because we're black, right? Mom Amara took a deep breath. Unfortunately, yes. Some people still judge others based on their skin color rather than their character. But those people are wrong, and increasingly, they're the ones who face consequences for their actions. As the aircraft doors finally closed and the plane began pushing back from the gate, Amara held Jacob's hand tightly. The delay had been minimal in flight time, but maximal in impact. None of them could have predicted how this seemingly routine flight would ripple through their lives and the national conversation in the days to come. 40 minutes later, as Flight AA782 reached cruising altitude, Eleanor Bennett sat in an airport holding room, her perfectly manicured fingers trembling as she called her husband. Outside in the main terminal, the first viral video of the incident hit 100,000 views. Breaking news tonight. Shocking video emerges of a woman assaulting a black child in the first-class cabin of an Atlantic Airways flight, only to discover his mother is the airline's new CEO. The CNN anchor's voice filled the Washington family's hotel suite in Chicago as footage of the incident played on screen. Eleanor Bennett's face barely blurred. "Turn it off, please," Amara asked the hotel manager, who had come to check on them personally. It had been just 6 hours since their plane touched down at O'Hare, and already the story had exploded across every major news outlet and social media platform. James sat cross-legged on the plush carpet, methodically organizing his space trading cards, his typical response to stress. Jasmine paced near the windows, occasionally checking the trending topics on her mother's phone. Jacob, still the most visibly affected, sketched quietly at the desk, his pencil creating dark, jagged lines across the paper. Amara's phone buzzed continuously with notifications calls from the board members' PR team and reporters from every major outlet. Outside the hotel, a small group of journalists had already gathered, hoping for a statement. Dr. Washington, the hotel manager, said, "Apologetically, we've increased security on your floor as requested. Is there anything else your family needs? Just privacy for now." "Thank you, Amara," replied her CEO. Composure still intact despite the personal nature of this crisis. After he left, Amara sat beside Jacob, gently placing her hand over his. "That's a powerful drawing." The sketch showed a small figure surrounded by towering shadows with exaggerated hands reaching toward him. For a 10-year-old, the symbolism was remarkably sophisticated and heartbreaking. "I keep seeing her face," Jacob admitted quietly. "When she hit me, she looked happy about it." Across town, in the significantly less luxurious airport detention area, Eleanor Bennett was discovering that her husband, Thomas, wasn't answering her increasingly frantic calls. What she didn't know was that Thomas, chairman of investment strategy at First National Bank, was watching the viral footage in horror during a board meeting. "For God's sake, Eleanor," he muttered as his colleagues stared at him with a mixture of sympathy and embarrassment. The video, which now had over 2 million views, clearly showed his wife's face contorted with disdain as she slapped a well-dressed black child who had done nothing wrong. The PR nightmare was just beginning. Within hours, internet sleuths had identified Eleanor as a prominent Atlanta socialite and the wife of Thomas Bennett. Her charity board positions, country club memberships, and previous incidents of entitled behavior were being unearthed and shared widely. The most damaging was security camera footage from Riverview Country Club 3 months earlier, showing Eleanor berating a young black valet and throwing her keys at him for being too slow. The club had quietly handled the incident internally, but a disgruntled employee had saved the footage. Back in 2018, the airline industry had faced a similar viral moment when a video showed a passenger being forcibly dragged off an overbooked flight. The company's stock had plummeted and their crisis response became a case study in what not to do. Now, Atlantic Airways found itself at another inflection point. But with a crucial difference, the CEO was personally affected. The board is split, reported Kesha, during a private call with Amara. Some want to use this as a defining moment in our commitment to inclusive customer experience. Others are concerned about appearing to leverage a personal incident for corporate messaging. "And what do you think?" Amara asked her trusted assistant of 8 years. "I think your children need their mother right now," Keisha answered honestly. "The company will survive either way." Jacob's school principal called next, expressing concern about his return to classes the following week. "We're already receiving media inquiries, Dr. Washington, and some parents have called asking if Jacob is okay." While Jasmine had responded to the incident with characteristic determination, "I'm going to be a lawyer so I can put people like her in jail," and James had retreated into facts and information. Jacob's reaction worried Amara most. The sensitive boy had barely spoken during their first day in Chicago. "I don't want to go back to school yet," he whispered when Amara broached the subject. "What if everyone asks questions? What if they've all seen the video social media wasn't helping?" The incident had spawned multiple hashtags. Number first class, while black number Karen on a plane, and the most viral number Amagdon for Karen, referring to the perceived reckoning coming for Eleanor Bennett. What do you think about Eleanor Bennett's behavior? Drop a comment with number 1, if you believe she should face criminal charges, or number 2, if you think a public apology would be sufficient. The impact of viral incidents like this can change lives forever. Should people be defined by their worst moments, or do they deserve a chance at redemption? Hit that like button if you believe in accountability, and subscribe to hear how this dramatic confrontation continues to unfold. Is this just another viral moment, or will it spark lasting change in how we address racism in everyday situations? Day 7 of what social media has dubbed the first-class fiasco brings new developments, announced the morning news anchor. Eleanor Bennett, the woman caught on video assaulting the 10-year-old son of Atlantic Airways CEO Dr. Amara Washington, has been formally charged with battery of a minor. Meanwhile, a national conversation about racial bias in the travel industry continues to gain momentum. Amara muted the television in her Chicago apartment, which had become a temporary headquarters during this unexpected extension of what was supposed to be a 3-day business trip. The family had moved from the hotel to a corporate apartment for privacy, but there was no escaping the story that had captivated the nation. "Mom, I'm trending again." Jasmine called from the dining room table where she was using Amara's iPad. Despite Amara's attempts to limit their exposure to news coverage, the tech-savvy Triplets found ways to monitor the situation. "What are they saying now?" Amara asked, joining her daughter. "There's a scholarship fund being set up in our names," Jasmine reported, "for black kids interested in aviation and travel industry careers. It's already raised over $200,000. The unexpected silver linings of this dark cloud continued to emerge. Atlantic Airways had seen a surge in bookings, particularly from black travelers expressing solidarity. The company's new amphibious training program, accelerated in response to the incident, was being lauded as the most comprehensive in the industry. In Atlanta, Eleanor Bennett's life was imploding spectacularly. The Peachtree Garden Society had unanimously voted to remove her as chairperson. The Atlanta Children's Hospital had quietly deleted her name from their donor wall. Her interior design business had lost half its clients in a week. Most painfully, Thomas Bennett had moved out of their Buckhead mansion and filed for legal separation. His statement through a spokesperson citing irreconcilable differences in core values. "I never raise my hand to our own children, and I cannot condone violence against any child." Thomas had told his wife during their last conversation, "You need help, Eleanor, professional help." For Amara, navigating this crisis meant balancing her children's emotional needs with her responsibilities as the face of a major corporation. She had reluctantly agreed to one carefully controlled interview with a respected journalist focusing on the larger issues rather than the specific incident. "What we experienced is unfortunately not unique," she had explained on camera. "The difference is that most victims don't have corporate power or millions of witnesses. This isn't about one woman's actions. It's about the everyday indignities that people of color navigate, often without recourse." The interview had struck a chord, particularly a moment when the usually composed CEO briefly faltered while describing Jacob's nightmares. Black parents across America recognized their own fears. In her eyes, the pain of not being able to fully protect their children from racism. 7 months earlier, Amara had faced a similar situation during a first-class upgrade on a personal trip. The white businessman beside her had summoned a flight attendant to verify she was supposed to be there. There had been no viral video that time, no public outrage, just the familiar sting of prejudice and the practiced dignity of rising above it. Now her children were experiencing what she had hoped to shield them from for a few more years. Jacob especially was struggling. His teacher reported that he had become hypervigilant in class, flinching when classmates moved suddenly near him. His pediatrician had recommended trauma-informed therapy. "Why does it matter what color we are?" Jacob had asked during their family discussion about the incident. "We're just people." The innocent question had nearly broken Amara's heart. Throughout corporate America, the incident sparked performative responses and a few meaningful ones. Airlines rushed to issue statements condemning discrimination. Diversity consultants found their services suddenly in high demand. Social media feeds became a patchwork of black squares and carefully worded corporate solidarity. It's also surface level. Amara complained to her sister Diana during a rare moment of private frustration. "They want to align with us publicly while changing nothing structurally." "That's always been the game," Diana replied. "But you're actually positioned to do something real. That's what scares them." At the Triplets school, the ripple effects continued. Some parents organized a support rally for Jacob. Others awkwardly avoided eye contact with Amara at drop-off. A few children repeated their parents' problematic opinions, asking James and Jasmine uncomfortable questions like, "Why is your mom making such a big deal about this?" The school administration, after consulting with Amara, organized age-appropriate discussions about respect and kindness, carefully framed to address the incident without directly referencing it. For Jacob, art therapy became a crucial outlet. His initial dark sketches gradually incorporated color again, though the shadowy figures remained at the edges of his compositions. His therapist noted that he consistently drew himself smaller than actual proportion, a common response to trauma and feelings of powerlessness. "Will it ever feel normal again?" Jacob asked one night as Amara tucked him in. "A different kind of normal," she answered honestly. "But we'll get there together." As the Washington family worked toward healing, Eleanor Bennett faced her own reckoning. Dropped by her social circle and publicly vilified, she found herself alone with the consequences of her actions for perhaps the first time in her privileged life. The national conversation continued with thought leaders, celebrities, and everyday people weighing in on what the incident revealed about persistent racism in supposedly post-racial America. For many Black Americans, it was not shocking, but rather a validation of experiences they had always known to be real, despite frequent gaslighting. What happened to those children could have happened to mine, wrote a prominent Black author in a viral essay. The only difference is that their mother had the power to ensure consequences. Justice shouldn't require exceptional status. As week 2 of the media cycle began, Atlantic Airways announced a major initiative, comprehensive anti-discrimination protocols with real-time reporting mechanisms for passengers experiencing or witnessing bias. It was a tangible step forward from a company now inextricably linked to this watershed moment. For better or worse, the Washington family had become symbolic figures in America's ongoing struggle with its racist past and present. The weight of that responsibility settled heavily on Amara's shoulders as she continued to guide both her family and her company through uncharted territory. Just read the statement as written. Mrs. Bennett looked directly into the camera. Appear appropriately remorseful, but not defeated. Remember, this is about rebuilding your image. The crisis management consultant hired by Eleanor's attorney adjusted the lighting in the carefully staged living room of her now empty mansion. 23 days after the incident, Eleanor Bennett sat alone in a house that had once hosted Atlanta's elite. Thomas had taken an extended business trip to their Cayman Islands property. Her closest friends had stopped returning calls. Her adult children, Jennifer and Michael, had issued their own statement distancing themselves from her actions. I am deeply sorry for my inexcusable behavior toward Jacob Washington. Eleanor reads stiffly from the teleprompter. My actions were completely inappropriate, and I take full responsibility for the pain I caused him and his family. The consultant sighed, stopping the recording. Mrs. Bennett, you need to appear genuinely remorseful right now. You sound like you're reading a grocery list. This is humiliating, Eleanor snapped. I've apologized. I've been charged. I've lost nearly everything. What more do these people want? The consultant's expression tightened. These people is exactly the kind of language that got you into this situation. Eleanor's carefully constructed world had collapsed with stunning speed. The charity boards she'd chaired, positions that had given her social standing and influence, had unanimously voted to remove her. Riverview Country Club, where membership had been her family's status symbol for 3 generations, had sent a formal letter indicating her privileges were under review. Most painful was Thomas's ultimatum: get professional help for her problematic attitudes or face divorce proceedings. Their 40 years of marriage, it seemed, couldn't withstand the public exposure of behaviors he had privately enabled for decades. Let's try again, the consultant said wearily. And please try to mean it this time. The apology video, when finally released on Eleanor's social media accounts, was immediately dissected and dismissed as insincere. The comment section became so toxic that her accounts were temporarily suspended. Desperate to directly address the Washingtons, Eleanor had sent emails, flowers, and finally an expensive gift basket to Atlantic Airways headquarters. All were returned unopened with a cease and desist letter from the family's attorney. Mrs. Bennett, her own attorney, explained gently during a strategy meeting the court has issued a restraining order. Any further attempts to contact Dr. Washington or her children will result in additional charges. Eleanor's upbringing had ill-prepared her for this moment of reckoning. Born to wealthy parents in Atlanta's old money society, she had attended exclusive private schools where diversity meant admitting a token few students of color who were expected to assimilate into white cultural norms. Her sorority at Vanderbilt had proudly maintained traditions that subtly excluded non-white pledges. Her marriage to Thomas had merged 2 family fortunes built partially on historical exploitation that neither family acknowledged. Throughout her life, Eleanor had faced few meaningful consequences for her actions. Staff could be fired if they objected to her treatment. Friends who found her views distasteful simply drifted away without confrontation. Her children learned to navigate her moods and prejudices rather than challenge them. Now approaching 60, Eleanor Bennett found herself truly alone with her beliefs for the first time, and the reflection was unflattering. The most damaging aspect of your case, her attorney explained, is the clear racial component. If you had slapped a white child, it would still be assault, but without the hate crime considerations. Hate crime. Eleanor gasped. I'm not a racist. Some of the staff at my country club are black, and I've always been perfectly pleasant to them. The attorney's expression remained professionally neutral, but his silence spoke volumes. As her isolation deepened, Eleanor began experiencing anxiety attacks. Her doctor prescribed medication, but the pharmaceuticals couldn't address the fundamental identity crisis unfolding. If she wasn't Eleanor Bennett, respected socialite and tastemaker, then who was she? Her therapist, a requirement of her pre-trial release conditions, pushed her to examine uncomfortable truths. You mentioned that your grandmother taught you certain people knew their place. The therapist noted during their third session. How do you think those early messages shaped your interactions as an adult? That's ancient history. Eleanor deflected. Nobody thinks that way anymore, don't they? The therapist asked simply. Meanwhile, the triplets were processing their own emotions about the woman who had struck Jacob. During a family therapy session, their counselor had asked each child to express their feelings about Eleanor. I hate her, Jasmine had stated flatly. She hurt Jacob for no reason except that we're black. I wonder if someone taught her to be that way. James had mused, analytical, even in his anger. Like those documentaries about how hatred is passed down. Jacob, after long consideration, had said something that stunned everyone. I feel sad for her. She must be really unhappy inside to be so mean to people she doesn't even know. Amara had marveled at her son's capacity for empathy, even as she wrestled with her own far less charitable feelings toward Eleanor Bennett. As the criminal case proceeded, Eleanor faced a choice between accepting a plea deal, which included community service hours at a youth center in a predominantly black neighborhood, or risking a trial where the damning video evidence would be. Central. Take the deal. Her attorney advised a trial will only prolong public attention and potentially result in more severe penalties. The day Eleanor signed the plea agreement, she returned to her empty home and truly looked around for the first time in weeks. The expensive furnishings, the carefully curated art, the family photos from happier times, all of it felt hollow now. Her phone buzzed with a text from her son Michael, the first contact in nearly a month. Mom, I've been doing a lot of reading about unconscious bias and systemic racism. I think we need to have some difficult conversations when you're ready. I love you, but I can't pretend this isn't who you've always been anymore. That night, Eleanor Bennett cried herself to sleep, mourning not just her lost status and relationships, but the wasted years spent upholding beliefs that had ultimately left her broken and alone. All rise. Court is now in session. The Honorable Judge Maya Rodriguez presiding. The BIF's voice echoed through the tense courtroom as Eleanor Bennett stood beside her attorney, facing the consequences of her actions in the most public forum yet. Despite accepting a plea deal on the criminal charges, Eleanor now faced a civil lawsuit filed by the Washington family for emotional distress. The damages sought were substantial, though Amara had made it clear that any financial award would be donated to organizations combating discrimination in travel and transportation. Jacob sat between his siblings in the gallery, his small frame nearly swallowed by his first suit. 8 weeks had passed since the incident, but the media interest remained intense. A sketch artist captured the scene for news outlets as cameras weren't permitted in the courtroom. Your Honor, began the Washington's attorney, a distinguished black woman named Patricia Coleman. This case goes beyond a momentary lapse in judgment. Miss Bennett's actions represent the kind of discrimination that countless children of color experience daily, often without recourse or justice. Eleanor's attorney countered with a strategy focusing on her client's supposed remorse and the disproportionate social consequences she had already suffered. Mrs. Bennett has lost her marriage, her standing in the community, and her livelihood, he argued. While her behavior was inexcusable, the question before this court is whether additional punitive measures serve justice or merely vengeance. Judge Rodriguez, known for her no-nonsense approach, interjected, "Counsel, let's be clear. Social consequences are not legal ones. This court is concerned with the law, not public opinion." Throughout Amara's career, she had encountered the legal system's limitations in addressing racial discrimination. Early in her flying days, a first officer had made repeated comments about her being a diversity hire. When she reported him, she was told the comments were unfortunate, but not actionable. The memory of that institutional failure had partly motivated this lawsuit not for personal gain, but to establish a legal precedent. The proceedings took an emotional turn when Jacob was called to testify. The court had implemented special measures for the child witness, including allowing his therapy dog Luna to accompany him to the stand. "Jacob, can you tell the court what happened on the airplane that day?" Patricia asked gently. Jacob petted Luna's head for reassurance before speaking. "I was sitting with my brother and sister in first class. We were being quiet because Mom taught us airplane manners. When I came back from the bathroom, I tripped a little and touched the lady's seat." He pointed toward Eleanor without looking directly at her. "What happened then?" "She started yelling that we didn't belong there. She said, 'These kinds of people about us.' Then, when I reached for my pencil, she hit me on my face." Jacob's voice remained steady, though his hand tightened in Luna's fur. How did that make you feel? Jacob considered the question with a seriousness beyond his years. At first just surprised and hurt, then scared, like maybe I did something really wrong without knowing it. Later, I started having bad dreams about people hitting me for no reason. Eleanor visibly flinched at his words, her first apparent display of genuine remorse. "And how do you feel now?" Jacob Patricia asked. "Still scared sometimes?" He admitted. "I don't like being in crowded places anymore, and I worry about my mom traveling for work." His simple testimony affected the courtroom more powerfully than any expert witness could have. Several jurors wiped away tears. Even the court reporter paused briefly to compose herself. The defense attorney's cross-examination was cautious and brief, clearly reluctant to appear aggressive toward a child witness. Eleanor herself seemed unable to look at Jacob, staring instead at her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Expert witnesses followed, including Dr. Lydia Martinez, a specialist in childhood trauma. Children who experience racist incidents often develop a phenomenon we call race-based traumatic stress. Dr. Martinez explained, unlike adults who may have developed coping mechanisms over years of similar experiences, children lack the contextual framework to process such events. "And what are the potential long-term effects?" Patricia asked. "Without proper intervention, these children may develop anxiety, depression, hypervigilance, and a distorted sense of self-worth. They begin to view the world as fundamentally unsafe, particularly spaces historically coded as white." The defense's expert attempted to frame the incident as an isolated event unlikely to cause lasting harm, but faltered under cross-examination when asked to explain why Jacob's nightmares had persisted for nearly 2 months. Throughout her career, Amara had experienced the legal system's limitations in addressing racial bias. As a young pilot, she had reported a first officer who repeatedly referred to her as a diversity hire. The airline had deemed his comments unfortunate, but not actionable. That institutional failure had partly motivated this lawsuit not for financial gain, but to establish a meaningful precedent. Media coverage of the trial became increasingly political. Conservative commentators framed it as cancel culture gone wild, while progressive outlets highlighted the case as emblematic of privilege and accountability. For the Washington family, it was neither just a painful necessity in their healing process. On the third day of proceedings, Eleanor took the stand. Her typically imperious demeanor had been replaced by a subdued, almost meek presentation coached by her legal team. "Mrs. Bennett, please explain in your own words what happened on Flight A782, her attorney prompted. "I was having a difficult day," she began hesitantly. When Jacob touched my seat, I overreacted terribly. There's no excuse for my behavior." During cross-examination, Patricia Coleman methodically dismantled this narrative of an isolated outburst. "Mrs. Bennett, is it true that 3 months before this incident, You were recorded throwing your keys at a young black valet at Riverview Country Club. That was different. He was a simple yes or no, please. Yes, Eleanor admitted reluctantly. And is it true that in 2021 you complained to management about being seated near a black family during a charity gala? I don't recall the specific. I have the email here submitted as Exhibit C. Would you like to read it to refresh your memory? By the time Eleanor stepped down, her carefully constructed image of momentary lapse had crumbled under the weight of documented pattern and practice. The most powerful moment came unexpectedly during Judge Rodriguez's remarks before jury deliberation. This court has heard extensive testimony about the psychological impact of racial discrimination on children. What we haven't discussed explicitly is how privilege functions in our society, she noted. When individuals operate with the expectation that their comfort supersedes others' dignity, they perpetuate systems that harm us all. The jury deliberated for just 4 hours before returning a verdict, finding Eleanor liable for intentional infliction of emotional distress. The awarded damages, $3 million, were substantial enough to make headlines and established precedent for similar cases. Outside the courthouse, as reporters clamored for statements, Amara kept her children close. They had won, but victory felt hollow when measured against Jacob's continuing therapy sessions and midnight terrors. "Dr. Washington, how do you feel about the verdict?" shouted a reporter. "This was never about money," Amara replied. "It was about accountability and recognition that children of color deserve to exist in all spaces without fear of harassment or assault." As they moved toward their waiting car, Jacob looked back at the courthouse steps, where Eleanor stood with her attorneys looking suddenly small and old. "Mom," he whispered, "do you think she'll ever understand why what she did was so wrong?" It was the question at the heart of America's ongoing struggle with its racist history, whether genuine understanding and change were possible, or if accountability alone must sometimes suffice. 6 months after the verdict, Eleanor Bennett signed in at the reception desk of the Westside Youth Center. Located in one of Atlanta's historically black neighborhoods, the center had been part of her court-mandated community service. 500 hours working with children from backgrounds vastly different from her own. "Good morning, Miss Eleanor," greeted Darnell, a 12-year-old regular with a bright smile and basketball always in hand. "We're painting the mural today, remember? I've got the supplies ready." Eleanor replied, her tone lacking its former condescension. Her designer clothes had been replaced by practical slacks and a simple blouse, her elaborate jewelry set aside for the comfortable watch that helped her track her service hours. The transformation hadn't come easily or quickly. Her first weeks at the center had been awkward and tense, with staff skeptical of her motives and children aware enough of current events to know who she was. The Sense director, a formidable woman named Renee Jackson, had laid down clear expectations. "You're not here for redemption theater or a feel-good story," Renee had stated bluntly during orientation. "You're here to contribute meaningfully to these kids' lives while unlearning harmful patterns. Whether that changes you is up to you." Initially, Eleanor had approached her service with resentment, counting minutes until she could leave. She avoided interaction beyond what was strictly necessary, viewing the children as extensions of her punishment rather than individuals. The pivot point came unexpectedly during her 3rd week. A 7-year-old girl named Zoe had spilled paint on Eleanor's shoes, expensive loafers she'd stubbornly continued wearing despite their impracticality. Eleanor's instinctive sharp tone had made Zoe flinch and raise her hands defensively, a learned response to adult anger that froze Eleanor mid-sentence. That night, Eleanor had sobbed in her car, finally confronting the reality of who she had been and the fear she had caused Jacob Washington. The following day, she'd worn sneakers and brought extra arts for the children. Now, 6 months in, Eleanor worked with a small group on their community mural project, genuinely engaged in their creative process. The center had become her primary social outlet as former friends continued to avoid her, and Thomas proceeded with divorce proceedings across the country. In Chicago, Atlantic Airways headquarters buzzed with activity around the launch of the company's groundbreaking anti-discrimination initiative. As CEO, Amara had transformed a personal trauma into institutional change, implementing comprehensive training reporting mechanisms and accountability measures that were setting new industry standards. The Respect and Travel Alliance now includes 6 major airlines and 3 hotel chains, reported Kesha during their morning briefing. The collaborative approach is generating significant positive press. Amara nodded, reviewing the presentation materials for the afternoon's press conference. While professionally thriving, she remained focused on her children's healing journey above all else. The triplets, now 11, were processing their experience in distinctly individual ways. James had channeled his analytical nature into technology, developing a prototype app called Safe Space that allowed users to report discrimination incidents in public accommodations and transportation. It creates a searchable database, he explained to his impressed mother, so people can see patterns and avoid places with lots of reports. Jasmine, already passionate about debate, had become increasingly focused on social justice. Her school speech about bias and transportation had won regional competitions, and she now mentored younger students on effective advocacy. Mrs. Parker says, "I could be on the Supreme Court someday." She announced over dinner one evening. I told her, "I'm aiming higher. I want to change the laws, not just interpret them." Jacob's journey had been the most profound. The sensitive boy who had been directly traumatized had found his voice through writing filling journals with poems and stories that expressed his experiences. His therapist had encouraged this outlet, noting remarkable progress in his emotional processing. "I'm writing a story about a boy who can turn invisible when people are mean to him," Jacob shared during family therapy. But then he realizes that being invisible doesn't solve anything. So he learns to shine so bright they have to notice him. The family had relocated to a new home with enhanced security after receiving concerning letters from people who viewed Eleanor as a victim of woke culture. Despite these challenges, they were establishing a new normal. Thomas Bennett, meanwhile, had embarked on his own unexpected journey. After filing for divorce, he had sought counsel from a black colleague about how to address his complicity in Eleanor's behavior. "I never challenged her," he admitted during a mentorship program he now funded at his bank. "I dismissed it as just how she was raised rather than confronting the harm those attitudes caused." His personal education had led to professional changes, including diversity initiatives within his financial institution and a substantial personal donation to scholarship funds for students of color pursuing business degrees. The most surprising transformation came during a supervised youth center event where Eleanor worked with teenagers on financial literacy. One participant, a 16-year-old named Marcus, challenged her directly. "Why should we listen to you about anything?" he asked. "Weren't you that lady who hit that kid on the plane?" The room fell silent. 6 months earlier, Eleanor would have responded with indignation or defensive justification. Instead, she took a deep breath. "Yes, I was," she acknowledged, her voice steady. "I did something inexcusable because of biases I didn't want to admit I had. I'm not asking for forgiveness or claiming I've completely changed, but I am trying to learn and do better. And part of that is being honest about my mistakes." Marcus studied her for a long moment before nodding slightly. "At least you're not lying about it. My mom says most racist people never admit it even to themselves." "Your mom is very wise," Eleanor replied quietly. The exchange, while brief, marked a fundamental shift in Eleanor's understanding. She had begun the painful process of examining beliefs she had never questioned, recognizing the harm they had caused not only to others, but to her own humanity. That evening, for the first time, she wrote a letter to the Washington family, not seeking contact or forgiveness, but expressing genuine remorse. Following legal protocols, she sent it to their attorneys with no expectation of response. 1 year after the incident, all parties involved had been transformed in ways none could have anticipated. A random act of racism captured on video had catalyzed personal reckonings and institutional changes that rippled far beyond the individuals directly involved. "Are you sure about this?" Jacob Amara knelt before her son, straightening his bow tie in the hotel lobby. Exactly 1 year had passed since the incident that had changed their lives. We can still cancel if you're uncomfortable. Jacob squared his small shoulders. I'm sure, Mom. I want to do this. Beside them, Jasmine and James waited in matching outfits. Their expressions, a mixture of curiosity and protective concern for their brother. The past year had strengthened their already close bond as triplets, each supporting the others through their individual healing processes. Eleanor Bennett sat nervously in the hotel restaurant's private dining room, her hands folded tightly on the table. When her attorney had called to say the Washington family had responded to her letter and requested a meeting, she had been stunned. More surprising still was that the meeting would include the children, a decision made after extensive consultation with their therapists. The mediator, Dr. Gabrielle Torres, arrived first to establish ground rules. This is not a media event or a public reconciliation, she reminded Eleanor. The Washingtons have specific terms for this meeting, which you've agreed to. This is primarily for Jacob's healing process, not yours. Eleanor nodded. I understand. I'm grateful for the opportunity. When the Washington family entered, Eleanor stood respectfully. The triplets had grown noticeably taller in the past year. Jacob's eyes met hers briefly before looking away. Thank you for agreeing to meet, Amara said, formally maintaining her professional composure even in this deeply personal moment. After everyone was seated, Dr. Torres facilitated the structured conversation they had prepared for. Eleanor had spent weeks working with her own therapist on what she would say, focusing on genuine accountability rather than self-serving remorse. Jacob, James, Jasmine. She began addressing the children directly, but careful not to seem overly familiar. What I did on that plane was inexcusable. I hurt you because of racist beliefs I'd carried my whole life without questioning them. I'm deeply sorry for the pain and fear I caused. She continued explaining in age-appropriate terms the work she had done to understand her actions and their impact. I don't expect forgiveness, and I won't ask for it, but I wanted you to know that I recognized the harm I caused and that I'm committed to changing. Throughout her statement, Eleanor maintained appropriate eye contact, but respected the boundaries established beforehand. When she finished, there was a moment of silence. Jacob surprised everyone by speaking first. I wrote something he said quietly, removing a folded paper from his pocket. His therapist had suggested writing as a way to process his feelings about this meeting. Dear Mrs. Bennett, he read carefully. When you hit me on the plane, it made me feel like I did something wrong just by existing. I had nightmares for a long time. I was scared to go places because I thought other people might hurt me too for no reason. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears, but she maintained her composure out of respect for Jacob's courage. My therapist helped me understand that what you did wasn't my fault, Jacob continued. It was because of something called bias that made you see me as dangerous when I was just being a kid. He looked up from his paper. I don't hate you anymore. My mom says holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting someone else to get sick, so I'm letting it go. Not because what you did was okay, but because I don't want it to have power over me anymore. The simple wisdom of his words left everyone momentarily speechless. Jasmine reached for her brother's hand, squeezing it supportively. Thank you for your honesty, Jacob Eleanor responded when she could trust her voice. Your wisdom and courage are remarkable. Jasmine spoke next, her natural confidence evident. I'm still angry about what happened, she stated directly. Not just at you, but at a world where this keeps happening to kids who look like us. But I've decided to use that anger to make changes. James, always the analytical observer, simply nodded. Actions matter more than words, he added. So I guess we'll see. The meeting continued with structured discussion, facilitated by Dr. Torres. They didn't emerge as friends, nor was that the goal. What they achieved was something more important, a human recognition of harm accountability and the possibility of growth. As they prepared to leave, Eleanor handed Amara an envelope. This isn't a request for anything, she clarified quickly. It's documentation of the endowment I've established for the youth center. They're doing important work. In the years since the incident, Atlantic Airways had become an industry leader in anti-discrimination practices. Amara's leadership during the crisis had earned her profiles in Forbes and Time magazines, focusing not on the viral incident, but on the institutional changes she had implemented. The company's Respect and Travel initiative now included mandatory training for all staff, clear reporting mechanisms for passengers experiencing discrimination, and genuine consequences for violations. Other airlines had begun adopting similar measures, partly due to consumer demand for more inclusive travel experiences. Dr. Washington Eleanor said, as the meeting concluded, "You've built something important from a terrible situation. I want you to know, I recognize that." Amara's response was professional, but genuine. Change rarely comes without catalyst. "I would have preferred a different one, but I'm committed to ensuring something meaningful emerges from what our family experienced." Outside the hotel, as they walked toward their waiting car, Jacob spotted a scene that made him stop suddenly. Across the street, an older white woman was berating a young black boy who had accidentally bumped into her while skateboarding. Before Amara could react, Jacob walked purposefully toward them. "Excuse me?" he said clearly, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "He didn't mean to bump you. There's no need to yell at him." The woman turned, startled by the intervention. "This is none of your business, young man." "Actually, it is," Jacob replied. "Because when people see something wrong and don't say anything, it just keeps happening." The skateboarder, around 13, looked at Jacob with surprise and gratitude. Amara watched with pride as her son stood his ground, not with anger or accusation, but with the simple moral clarity that children often possess before the world teaches them to look away from injustice. In that moment, watching her son transform from victim to advocate, Amara saw the true resolution of their painful journey. The legal victory, the corporate initiatives, the public recognition, all were important. But Jacob's willingness to step forward rather than shrink back represented something far more valuable: the restoration of his sense of agency and worth. As they drove away, Jacob looked thoughtful. "Mom, do you think Mrs. Bennett really changed?" he asked. "I think she's trying," Amara answered. "Honestly, real change takes time and continuous effort, but the important thing is that we've changed too. We're stronger." "Like in my story," Jacob said, referencing his journal writing, "the invisible boy learned to shine." Exactly like that. Amara agreed, squeezing his hand. One painful moment captured and amplified in our interconnected world had created ripples that continued to spread through individual lives, corporate policies, and public consciousness. While no single incident could resolve America's complex relationship with race, each moment of accountability, each act of courage, and each institutional change moved the needle incrementally toward justice. As they headed home to begin the next chapter of their lives, the Washington family carried with them not just the scars of trauma, but the strength forged through resilience. And somewhere across town, Eleanor Bennett continued her own journey of unlearning and remaking one day at a time. This powerful story reminds us that racism isn't just about grand systemic issues, but also manifests in everyday moments that can profoundly impact children's lives. The transformation we witness from Jacob's trauma to his courage in standing up for another child shows how resilience can emerge from pain when proper support exists. Eleanor's journey demonstrates that meaningful change requires honest self-reflection and accountability, not just public apologies. Amara's response illustrates how individual experiences of discrimination can fuel institutional change when people in positions of power commit to justice. Most importantly, this story teaches us that bystander intervention matters. The incident might never have gained attention without passengers recording it, and Jacob might never have found healing without witnessing adults standing up for what's right. True progress happens when we refuse to look away from uncomfortable truths and instead face them with courage, compassion, and commitment to growth. Has racism touched your life in ways big or small? We'd love to hear your story in the comments below. Have you ever stood up against discrimination, or wished you had comment courage? If you found strength to speak up, or learning, if you're still finding your voice. If this story moved, you please hit that like button, to help others find it too. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories that explore tough social issues with honesty and hope. Share this video with someone who needs to understand how racism affects real families. Sometimes one meaningful conversation can change a perspective forever. Thank you for being part of a community that believes in facing hard truths and working toward healing. Remember, the journey toward justice begins with seeing each other's humanity clearly.